Mr. Kraus, the live stream is working.
All right, well, thank you very much, and welcome to the Facilities Committee meeting. I understand there are no public comments tonight,
That is correct.
so we will drive right into the meat of the meeting here. So,
If I could start just with an introduction in terms of what tonight is. Thank you for making time for this special meeting for the facilities, to have an extra one this month that provide us a time to just kind of set some long-range goals. So first, I want to thank Mr. Harper and Mr. Daubert for the work they've done tirelessly over the last 3-4 months putting this information together. And so, as you know, Sitelogic had done an evaluation of all of our facility needs and had put together the long-term facility maintenance list. And so we'll talk a lot about the LTFM document that's in here, as well as Mr. Harper has regular conversations with our building administration to make sure that he talks about the work that is being done there, the work that needs to be done, obviously, are the people who are in the buildings on a daily basis, and having those conversations, as well as he went back and looked at the most recent list that had been generated by Dewey Engineering. And so when Dewey was we had a similar document, and so Dewey had set priorities, and we had that document as well. So Mr. Harper has incorporated all of those. Let me just explain to you the documents that are in board docs, as well as the ones that are in front of you, so that as we reference them, you at least know they're there, and you'll look for them as you have questions. Up here we have the estimated 5-year funding PDF. This was the document that Mr. Daubert discussed a couple months ago. Kind of get a sense for the funds that are available to the board over the next 5 summers. And so when we talked about this, and I'll just give a recap, we talked about over the next 3 summers, with the summer of 2021 being one of those 3, the one that's coming up, where we've already put forth about $6.7 million worth of projects, so just under $7 million. We talked about the first 3 years having about $20 million, it adds to 19.7, and the next 2 summers having about $20 million. And that's primarily because of, hopefully, the economy, getting back to the point where we are putting $3 million a year back in at the end of the year, as well as the debt drop-off. So you can see that third line down that says funds available, the debt drop-off. In the summer of 2024, there's an extra $6 million, and then the following summer, it's another 2 to make an extra $8 million that is available, and that's why there's more funds available there. So that's one document that's there that we can refer to and discuss. The LTFM is a document that obviously you can't read up here, but you have a paper copy and it's on board docs. We can make it a little larger on here. But basically the organization is, and I'll have Mr. Harper start here after I'm done speaking, he set through the next 6 summers. So this first sheet is 2021. So none of these projects are going to be a surprise to you, and that's the $6.7 million that we have allocated for this summer. Obviously, we don't have firm prices yet on West Rock Hill and the tennis courts, but we do have our estimates up there for the $3.2 million for those 2 projects. The other ones are all numbers that Sitelogic has provided to us. There then is a sheet like this for every summer through the summers of 2026. After that, as you get further on in the document, there are, let me get through 2026. After that, he then he being Mr. Harper, grouped projects by category to just kind of get a sense from a priority standpoint, what are the O&M projects that are still out there that need to get done at some point, that he would prioritize, but they're not plugged into a year. There's then obviously some of the large projects that we talked about. LED lighting is on there, interior renovations, our work at the kitchens, elementary DOAS, and air conditioning. And so all of those things that we've talked about are also part of this document. We then have received some additional information about South Middle School in terms of the auditorium. And so there are 2 pieces of information that are in board docs. One is an old document that was done in 2013, which was the last artist's sketch about a possibility that a board back then was speaking about. And so that's there, as well as some thoughts from Sitelogic in terms of 2 current ideas. They do not connect those 2 documents. So what you received today from Sitelogic has to do with their ideas about renovating or redoing the current space. There obviously then is the drawing about if we completely built a new auditorium and made some additions to the music area and things like that in terms of another idea. The last piece of information that's in board docs is the DOAS and the elementary air conditioning comparison that was sent by Sitelogic. with just a lot of the different options that they talked about. And so they did at the last facility meeting talk about a 4-pipe system versus a 2-pipe system, because if you do DOAS, you don't need the 4-pipe system. You only need a 2-pipe system, so that's why it's not as expensive as a 4-pipe. And we had those conversations when they were here speaking with us. Just for a sake of priority, I asked Mr. Harper if he would, I apologize, wrong document. I asked if he would, on this document, kind of take a target number of about $2 million a year. And that was just because we think about when we add projects together in the summer, and it was just for us to set priorities and say, okay, if we were to pick $2 million, what would come first? What would come next? What would come next? Right? Nothing magical about that number other than it's an estimate that we put in place. So I want you to keep a couple things in mind though. So here's 2022. Right, these are the priority items after this summer that Mr. Harper, working with Mr. Dahlberg, myself, and the building administration, would put forward for 2022. Right, it adds to, based on the current numbers we've been given by Sitelogic, and again, these are estimates, it would add to just over $2 million. But please notice there are multiple projects that have no number on them. And so if we did everything on this list, it obviously would be more than $2 million. There is some down here at the bottom, the ones that are in these different colors. Right. That's the work at the high school that would facilitate the change for the Penn Ridge Academy for Student Wellness that we talked about at our recent meeting, and some of the renovations that would have to happen there. And we have not gotten drawings or prices for any of those at this point. And so when we say $2 million, it's not this whole list. There's a couple things up here that don't have prices, that aren't as expensive, but we would have to price them out if the determination was made to do that. And that's true in many of the summers, right? As you get later on, you can see here there's a kitchen thing in 2023 that doesn't have a price tag to it. So when you're looking at numbers, please remember their estimates, and please remember that there are some things without prices, right? Mr. Harper, if you would start and just give us a sense for how you went about prioritizing these numbers, these projects, and why you put the things in the years you put, and any other decisions, and the board will probably have some questions for you.
Yeah, so that was a great overview of, so Sitelogic, you remember 2 years ago, came out, surveyed all of our buildings, and they also took into account the project list that Dewey had. There was over 700 projects in this whole LTFM tool, and to sort that and to prioritize it, what's our most bang for our buck, where should we start? Page 1, like Dr. Bolton said, that these are the projects we did and the ones that were approved for this coming summer. And you'll see I'm kind of in Technicolor here with greens and blues. It's just how we're alternating through the years to try to keep track of 700 projects and which year is which. So if you look at any of these pages, the first column, you'll see a D number in some of those cells, and that's referring to the Dewey project. So if it says D22, they had that project slated for 2022, and the same D21 was 2021. That's what that column means if you look at that and say, what's that mean? The next column, really you have to look at the top left-hand corner of the blue box on page 2. This is 2022. And below that, there are various years. This is really a cut and paste exercise. I didn't change any of the years. I just put all the things in this blue box or prioritized for 2022. And a good point that Dr. Bolton had, if you don't see a price tag next to it, it has not been estimated by Sitelogic. So we don't have a cost, it's an unknown. If we're all liking what you see on these pages, we're gonna go and ask them to put numbers on that for estimates so that we can tighten up our bottom line number here. So as I was going through here and staying in the year 2022, the blue box, I categorized by site work and paving, and we can look through any of those projects to talk about the details if you like, but just to stay on those gray bars of categories. The next one down was environmental, which is asbestos and a lead abatement. That's actually a fairly big ticket item estimated for Sellersville. They have a significant amount of asbestos floor tile and some translate ceilings that they're having problems with. That's why I put it in the next year for an approval. The next biggest one is building envelope. And by building envelope, it's everything outside the building that keeps temperature, moisture out of the building. So if your building envelope's compromised, you're getting rain and heat and cold transfer. So that's why I put a lot of these projects loaded into this year and the next year. For this year, in 2022, I captured elementary schools only, just to stay in that group of economy of scale, trying to get a lot of building envelope in one year as much as I could, but that you'll see they're spread out in other years. Middle schools is next year, some other buildings are following years, but building envelope, I wanted to have this in the front as possible, because if you start getting rain into the building, you start having indoor air quality, and you're wasting money on HVAC. So I think that was a good reason to load that into the front.
And can I just point out one thing, Mr. Harper? If you see where it says building envelope, he did give you an addition for everything that is within building envelope. And so all of those items, if they have a number, in this case they all do have a number, would be 1.5 million, 1.6 million is the estimate. Again, it's an estimate, but it gives you a sense for the scope and how much that contributes to the total that's at the bottom. Okay?
You know, I put a lot of different criteria into this to say how much we really want to put in every year, so you can break out those different chunks. I have them summarized, or totals, on the right-hand side. So the next category, MEP, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. Most of these don't have any prices or estimates on them yet. And again, we can talk through some of the details of these, but some of these issues here are more important than others, is why I wanted to put them in this year. Some of them are safety issues. Just the first one, for example, at North Middle School, the lighting control system that controls their hallway lighting and other main areas, right now they're turning them on and off with breakers, which is not a good idea. They have a electronic control system that's failed, but they found a way to make it work in the meantime. Controlling with breakers is a bad idea. I wanted to get a price of what would this cost to replace that. I don't know how we want to address the type of system, but just the category of that's something that needs to be addressed sooner than later. If it completely fails, I'm not going to say we're in the dark, but it's another obstacle. So those are some MEP. The one at the very bottom where there are no numbers are interior renovations. The one that's in yellow is an old project that was requested by Dr. Cole at North Middle School, some changes in their STEM room. And the three green ones, like Dr. Bolton said, that's some renovations that need to happen in the high school so we can go with new programs that are of value here at the high school. The one at the bottom of that is bathroom floors and drainage. It's another project that it's a safety issue. We have standing water, some bathroom floors aren't pitched right toward floor drains. They just need to be prioritized and added to some of these years sooner than later. You'll also notice in MEP, in every year, there's at least one food service project. We wanted to keep those projects rolling every year. And typically, we've done that historically. Well, it's dishwashers, walk-in freezers, and refrigerators. We've been doing those kind of projects every year for many years now.
And within those categories, you prioritized them. So when you were picking a kitchen, you picked the one that you thought was the highest priority first, and then so on and so forth.
Correct.
And sometimes that money doesn't come out of capital. Sometimes that money comes out of food service capital, depending on that fund. Although that fund has, taken a hit, obviously, the last 2 years.
Right. Gina Giortana and I have worked with Schrader Group, some food service consultants, looked at all the different kitchens, serving areas, and such, and came up with a plan for the future, at least a starting point. This one doesn't have a dollar amount because this one could be more substantial, but if nothing else, it's a placeholder to say we need to do some food service projects in 2022. Any questions about 2022 until we move to the next year?
No, I like the way you group these things together, Mr. Harper, because I can see that some things you've pulled in from 2024 into 2022. And it's when you look at it in a list like this, you can clearly see that it makes sense to keep those items together. Because you're working on the exterior of the building in 2022, why would you wait till 2024 to do something that you're already working on the exterior? So, thank you.
it's tight to keep that bucket of money and the different projects. I thought those were the ones that are the bigger priority to get them sooner than later. So if we go to 2023, every list is gonna shrink from here. Some projects are bigger, but you see the list is smaller. There's several Dewey projects in here, but we have the building envelope, and these are middle school only. I just separated it by that just to have a placeholder for them. Again, they're the same kind of building envelope. You're keeping moisture, HVAC, you're just keeping so the building doesn't get compromised any further with leakage. The next category was interior renovations, and at West Rock Hill, there's a substantial amount of VCT, and that's vinyl composition tile. It's the flooring you see pretty commonly everywhere except in this building. There's a significant amount of VCT that's cracking. The cafeteria's got a lot of cracks in it, but Dewey and Sitelogic had this as a priority to get done because of the condition of the flooring there. Central Middle School is another big ticket item. On the second floor, all of the classrooms are carpeting. I have to tell you, through the pandemic, that's been a challenge to have soft surfaces for floors. The intention is to take the carpeting out and put a VCT or other hard surface floor in, much easier to maintain and care for and keep disinfected. So that's another big ticket project here.
Can I answer a question about those two line items? And I apologize, I didn't notice this till this weekend. They both reference the second floor at Central. Are they two separate sections, or is one a subsection and that the work really is only the larger ticket item?
So these were differently, so I do see that. I would say it's possible they're duplicated.
Okay.
Again, this was mostly a cut and paste activity out of the LTFM tool. So I'll have to clarify those numbers. Just like the zero amounts, these are all estimates. We'll need to make sure that these are the right numbers, but they're big ticket numbers that we need to say, what is the real number here?
Great, thank you.
So yes, definitely need to clarify if that is a duplicate or not. MEP, so Bedminster Elementary is one of our schools that uses pneumatics. We actually have two, West Rock Hill and Bedminster. Pneumatic control, especially in the pandemic, another lesson learned, it's almost impossible or very difficult to control. The main thing that we want to control is fresh air. We're able to do it, but it's not as easy to control and monitor with pneumatics. We certainly are doing what we need to do, but with pneumatics it's more challenging. If we had electronics, you can tell exactly what it's doing at any time. Pneumatics is a different animal, it's old technology, and something that needs to be upgraded. We have another placeholder for West Rock Hills food service, kitchen improvements, some plumbing work at the district support center. So that is something I added in. If you look at I'm not sure which column it is, but when you look over where it says new, this is something that was not in the LTFM. I added this in as a category. It's, again, at the district support center, they have found a way around this problem up until now. And I guess since I'm here, I have to say it. Their solution to the problem is they use single-ply toilet paper. If they use something else, they constantly are clogging their sewer line. It's out in the parking lot. It's similar to South Middle School, but not the leak part. It's a plumbing issue. They found a way to manage, but it's something that there's a problem with the sewer line out in the parking lot that needs to be dug up to be resolved. I plugged in the same number they used for South, just as a placeholder to say, we need to get a better handle on what a cost estimate is there.
And every time you snake it, it ends up costing money or
Right,
or
it's just a
time or something.
continuous problem.
On this one as well, Mr. Harper, it looks like the Bedminster Elementary may have been duplicated.
Right, so we definitely have two in there, and we have to tighten up those numbers. I'm working with what the Sitelogic had put in their LTFM tool, and there are two components of this. There's, if you're familiar enough with building automation, there's a front end part, and then there's the field level controls. So it's converting all the equipment out into classrooms and then tying it into the central system. So there probably is some overlap, but again, these numbers, all of these numbers could change based on circumstances. but
Yep.
they're in a fair ballpark to say it's not a cheap job. It's a fairly expensive job to do, but it's something that's needed. Any questions, 2023? Okay, 2024, so there's more building envelope, and these I put into a miscellaneous category. There's a few schools which they involve doors, so it's still air leakage and those kind of problems, but I included some other things like the district support center, the operations building. There still are buildings that we need to maintain, but again, elementary schools I had in the first priority, the next year middle schools, and this is just grabbing some others further down the road. The next category, environmental, so there's two smaller projects, but important, asbestos and lead abatement that were identified, one at Grass and one at Seiler. Grass is one of the schools that still has a large portion of asbestos tile. They're in good condition, and that's a decision maker for asbestos tile. If you don't disturb it and it's in good condition, it'll last forever. It's whenever it starts cracking and becomes friable, that's when it's a health concern. It's in pretty good condition there, so this is just one at Grass is an area where there's gonna be a food service project, so we have to get that tile up at some point before we do the food service work. That's why this is in here. It's Seiler. Apparently there's lead paint in the boiler room, and that's a high heat area. I can only imagine it's not affecting a lot of people, but still it's in the building. We need to do some abatement in there and get rid of those kind of environmental issues. Some interior renovations, and as we get further through the years, things are still important, but they're not as high priority, so some of these things could be shifted around to different years. But again, I'm trying to prioritize based on all these 700 plus projects and fitting them into what's more important. You see the yellow highlights, I actually had to move some of these projects out of 2022 because I was over the $2 million target. That's was just my method to my madness of why they're there. Moving some things down to try to free up money. Some of those other projects, like the high school interior renovations, we don't know what the price is for that. If we want to do that sooner than later, we need to have that ability to shift things around from year to year. Like one project of note in there under interior renovations, it's $156,000. It talks about the corridors and the 12 by 12 ceramic tiles.
Yeah.
Same kind of tiles are similar to what we're on in this room. And throughout the building, and this is a original construction issue, and you've probably seen the silver plates in hallways. And those are all places where expansion joints were supposed to be installed, but they got skipped and didn't get done with the original construction. So as the building naturally moves, you get that expansion and contraction, tiles are cracking, it just becomes a nightmare. So their fix was to just put a cap over top of it. I found a solution last year for a good expansion joint. We started installing a few of them. If you come in the main entrance, if you look down, you'll notice a silver strip about 1.5 inches wide. It actually has the ability to move an inch. It's an appropriate expansion joint. Long story short, this addresses all of those expansion joints throughout the building so that we can get rid of those metal plates that are getting bent up, and they're just not gonna hold up over time.
So
That's
this
what,
is actually new expansion joints, correctly
in the
installed.
place where they should have been installed, yes.
Okay.
So some other MEP, so at Guth Elementary, we have an underground fuel tank, 1988, they're typically a 30-year warranty on a tank. It's like a lot of things. When your car gets to that age, or your battery, or different things, you start to have concerns about it, especially an underground tank. And we pay for an indemnity fund if it ever does have a leak, but we've been going to above ground tanks that you can see and monitor and have a better idea of, rather if it's underground, it could leak, and that's just a real mess to have to abate fuel leaks.
And that's
underground.
heating fuel, right?
Correct.
As opposed to any other type of fuel. I just
Diesel,
wanna
right,
be clear.
correct. So some other miscellaneous projects in there under MEP. plugging them in there. We have Guth Elementary as a holding place for food service. And again, Schrader Group and a consultant identified things from serving lines to walk-in boxes, refrigerators. We need to put a hard ticket cost on these, but again, it's a holding place for one food service project every year.
And then you did the same kind of rhythm in 2025 and 2026, and like you said, obviously the list gets shorter, not necessarily a dollar amount. Is there anything significant in terms of the prices? Because I think you've done a nice job in terms of giving us a sense for the categories, and obviously people can read those, but a couple summers down in terms of priority.
If we don't want to be here till midnight, we can say they're all very similar moving forward on that.
Well, I wanted to get beyond 2026 because your organization then comes into play in terms of priorities. So is everybody comfortable moving into what's called the project categories, which are just after 2026? Do you want to give a little sense in terms of where this came from, and some of these things have years, some of these things don't have years, right? Where did this list come from?
Yeah, so this is part of that 700 project list, and so I'll just go through the big categories. O&M projects. Both Sean and I decided these are things that really don't belong in the capital improvement project fund, that they should be worked into my budget, that I can address as funds allow or budget allows. So everything O&M you can take off the page, but I wanted to leave it here to say of some of the projects were identified, we're taking them off this list, that we're gonna do them with a different budget.
So these are funds that are worked into your budget annually to be able to address more minor building level pieces that you work with principals.
Correct.
And these are the types of things that you would normally address, and so you will work on addressing them over the next 5 years.
Correct.
Perfect.
So other big categories, next LED lighting, and all these costs, I believe, are confirmed, accurate. If we wanted to do them, these are the right numbers, they're not just estimates. The next category was interior renovations. Some of these were part of the 2022 that don't have numbers. The one that will jump out at you, South Middle School Auditorium. We'll keep moving on. I can come back to that if you like. Site work and paving. That has to do with this campus and the proposed parking lot that we've talked about to some length. And I tried to give some descriptions in there so you can understand where they are. It's one thing to say parking lot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But there's some description that'll give you an idea of where it physically is located on campus. Kitchen serving lines and equipment's another category. Kitchen HVAC, DOAS, and this blue section of DOAS, there's another handout that gives you more accurate information, and it touches every elementary school. Environmental asbestos lead abatement. There's another project that doesn't have to happen yet, but should sooner than later at Grass. Then we have electrical and fire alarm upgrades to round that out. There's one final category beyond this, and I termed them greater than 2029. These are all other things that I felt were not something that was necessary in the next 5 years. We could certainly go through that and look at those projects, but I didn't put them in the next 5 years. That's what that final category is.
And they were taken from the Sitelogic, I mean, some of them were also on Dewey, but primarily they were from the Sitelogic exhaustive list that they pulled together.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's the method to the madness from what you have in front of you.
You see the amount of work that has
Thank
gone
you.
into this in terms of the
Yeah.
organization
Yeah.
to provide for this
Thank you.
organization.
Beautiful package.
Thank you.
It's impressive.
So it's a starting point if nothing else, and we can certainly talk about it. If it's good to go, then we just get better pricing, or if there's things we want to add into different years, LED lighting or whatever it may be, that's where this conversation goes from here.
Awesome.
Do you know if this, so is this plan something that you sort of came up with, or did you learn about it from somewhere else? Would it be because if it's something that you came up with, I think it would be nice to share with other school districts as a best practice, kind of. It's so organized, and it's why our facilities are well taken care of, I think.
Two answers to that. So the LTFM, all these projects were generated with the collaboration of Penn Ridge and their engineering staff. They put them into their LTFM tool, and I had to export this to go through it and then resort it. The resorting was all internal, based on what we know about Penridge, what's more important, and thinking through the things like the building envelope. That needs to be a priority because it has so many other complications the longer you wait on it. But just gathering and pricing, that was Sitelogic with us, but the prioritizing was really in-house.
So they need to sign up for a Sitelogic. No. Shameless
I
plug.
don't know if we can say shameless plug.
And so then the purpose of this is really, I mean, there don't need to be any final decisions made because this summer is determined. But for us to get some direction from the board in terms of as we're building future years, it will allow Sitelogic to get better pricing early, right? If we do know the types of things that we're working towards over the next summer or two. Some of the long-term priorities, so that as Mr. Dahlberg's planning financially, we'll see how much he sweats by the end of the evening in terms of money being spent and things like that. So just wanted to provide an opportunity to, when we didn't have other agenda items, to have some conversation to see how people are, thinking about long-range planning, the ordering of projects. If there's anything specific, obviously in this presentation, we can handle, but just wanted to provide an opportunity.
I appreciate the way you presented it, Mr. Harper, and I like that, we've prioritized maintenance of our buildings. Right? That's our, one of our biggest assets that we have, are the buildings. And we need to maintain them so that we're not in a position to, like we were here at the high school, where we didn't maintain it for the last 20 years, so we have to build a new one. So I appreciate that and the prioritization. I also appreciate you trying to keep the number around $2 million a year. I know that wasn't easy.
That was tough.
And that may change as time goes forward, right? We don't know. This is our best guess as of today, right? So I appreciate that. I don't know if anybody else has anything that they want.
So I guess my only thing, we have, I would say, two major outstanding projects that we've kind of talked about over the years and haven't actually gotten to. And with the pricing being down right now during all of this COVID situation and costs for those kinds of things being lower, I think it makes sense to try to take advantage of the market right now and get some work done that, if we wait a couple years to do it, would cost us a few $1 million more to wait. And so, I think it makes sense to start to prioritize doing those things now because we have the money to do it. And the two projects that I would be talking, that I'm referring to, are the DOAS for, having air conditioning in the elementary schools, as well as the auditorium for South Middle School, so that there's parity in the buildings. We talk about equity, and there certainly isn't equity in that middle school compared to the other two middle schools. And really, when you're comparing the elementary schools
Thank you.
to the middle and high schools. So, I would suggest that we prioritize doing that now while we have the money, and that saves us several $1 million rather than waiting to do it down the line. And I had my notes here, and it keeps.
I think you're forgetting the baseball field. Is that what you're gonna say? Or the baseball stadium? My bad.
But you've been doing such a great job of getting us access to baseball fields, Dave. Like, you've already got that covered. I feel like I don't want to take that job away from you. You've been doing such a great job on it. But one of the things, when you talk about how much money we have to use, we also have $6 million that's in that reserve fund that really we have no purpose for. And it makes more sense to build that Peasers drop into our debt drop, because that's going to happen indefinitely, just like Peasers would happen indefinitely. So it makes sense to build that into that rather than have $6 million that we've just been sitting in this account for absolutely no reason. And it's been the recommendation from our business administration that we shouldn't plug a recurring cost with a set amount of money like that, because then you're just building on that in future years. When you look about what are assigned, how much we have in our reserves, the recommended amount, we have 5% would be about 7.1 million, and we have 34 million. So, there's a lot of money that we could play with, especially knowing that our debt is going to be dropping in 3 years. So we know that that's guaranteed money that we're getting back. And so I'm just looking at the fact that we could do projects for several $1 million cheaper sooner than later. And rather than waiting 3 years and then we're paying millions of extra dollars to do it then as opposed to doing it now. So that's kind of where, as I was doing the math on having, what money we have, it looks like when you combine that committed amount plus, we're also going to be getting $3 to $3.5 million per year towards capital that we talk about, conservatively we could even say 1.5 million per year, right? Which would be 4.5 over 3 years. It's still is a pretty substantial amount of money, and so conservatively, even if you don't take that part into account, you end up with $38.5 million over the next 3 years that you could use before the debt drop, and then you get all of that money built into the debt drop with diffusers and all of that. So I'm not suggesting we use all of it, but what I am suggesting is that we could afford to do those 2 projects. It's $4 million, based on the numbers that we have here. Looks like it would be about $4 million to do the auditorium at South, and close to $12 million, although I'm not sure if that builds in the 20% less for the DOAS, or if it would actually be less. I'm not really sure if the discount is only built into those 3 solid numbers we have, or if it's built into all of them. So I guess that would make a difference in whether or not that $12 million number is accurate or not.
I talked to Mr. Evans about 45 minutes ago to ask some questions because these numbers came in today. He said that those 4 schools are their best estimates based on their experience pricing the 3 schools. So they are still estimates, but they are his better guess than their original estimates in terms of what the cost would actually be if we decided to do DOAS at those buildings. And so they are, with all the discounts loaded in terms of that piece, because you can see they are similar to the prices of the other ones. Although the prices for Grass-Kuth and Seiler are different than what we were quoted originally, and so we have to have some conversation about obviously where that landed and why they went up a little bit, but everything else came down drastically from that standpoint. I just want to remind everybody of this document, right? Talk through a couple things that Ms. Baines-Clemens said, because she's correct. There are other funding streams that are available in the district, some assigned, some unassigned, some for purposes, some for rainy day and pieces like that. This document does have a built-in fund piece at the end of every year. And so that's what this line item is, or the numbers that Mr. Dahlberg is predicting will be unused funds at the end of the year to be added in. And so obviously a little more conservative the first 3 years. And then there is that $3 million that talking about from that standpoint. So.
Well, I would prioritize doing something for South Middle School has been something we've been talking about for a number of years. And so for me, I would prioritize anything at South before, as the number one thing. If we're going to do something like this where we would fast track a project, for me that would be South. It's the one that sticks out. And the other question that I would have is, what year are we in we have the Pennsylvania Economic League come and do an evaluation of the school district every so often. And how many years ago was the last, it was during this 4 years, no?
Are you talking
Dr.
about,
Bolton,
you're talking about the enrollment study?
Yeah, because
So they did the work in 17, 18 and presented in 18.
Okay.
And so it's been,
It's
you know,
been a
it's
number
coming up,
of years.
It's been 3 years.
So
3
I
years
think,
since they pulled data.
I think it might be prudent to maybe consider how our area might be growing differently from the last time that study was done, and sort of consider maybe thinking about, well, are we going to grow? Could it be different from what they told us the last time? And might we need to spend money doing other projects that we're not anticipating right now? Because Penridge has become kind of a hot area for real estate. Houses are just flying off the shelf. So that would just be my thoughts, that I wouldn't want to go too crazy.
And we do track against their enrollment estimates, because they had them out for 10 years, and so we're only about halfway through their enrollments. And they projected about a 5% decrease, and we're hitting about 3% decrease, so we are decreasing, but not as quickly as they thought. Hitting upper elementary and middle school currently in terms of as it moves through. High school's supposed to stay pretty flat. Elementary has another year or two of slight decreases. Then it'll flat. Middle school will be impacted over the next few years, but again, only to a couple percent. And it's primarily at North and Central, not at South in terms of where we are now. Housing is up a little bit based on their projections, and so whether that number becomes 2% or 1% in terms of enrollment. A couple other financial things to be thinking about, just so that they're out there. One is tech school debt refinancing. Right, when we talked about refinancing, we talked about tech school debt. I believe that's May of next year. I believe we're 13, 14 months from when it becomes callable. We obviously could do a taxable piece anytime.
March of 2020.
Yeah, okay, so March of 2020. So we're a year away of that. One of the things, if you remember, that helped us from our credit school standpoint was our fund balance. So we just have to be careful over the next year if we are impacting our fund balance, to be careful about whether that would have an impact, because we will have to go back to credit score if we're going to refinance debt. Right, and so we're not guaranteed to keep the wonderful score that we have, although hopefully we would, because it's not significant changes. So I want to think about that. Think about emergency funds. Obviously, as we think about money available, right? Obviously, one of those things is emergency funds. I asked, just as an exercise, I said to Mr. Dalbert, I said, what's 2 payrolls? Right, so if you think about it, if you want to pay, like what did my mom always say, have 3 months, 6 months, whatever you're supposed to have, 2 payrolls is $8 million. And so I'm not suggesting Penridge is in a situation where we're not going to make payroll, but I'm giving you a sense for how quickly a fund balance would go in an emergency. An emergency wouldn't be payroll, just trying to give us a sense for set costs, right? Obviously, roofs aren't going to be $8 million, or some sort of storm damage, things like that. It does impact interest earnings. We're hoping they come back. So obviously, the less money you have, the less interest earnings you get. So it hits you more than one place. Again, not significant. But I just want us to be thinking about that as we're thinking about fund balance numbers, right? So.
And if you build in the $2 million a year for the projects that are already in the, in this plan, and then you add in the DOAS and South, you would still be at $22 million over the 3 years, and then you have the debt drop after that. So. It is doable.
Another thing that we're not taking into account here, but we've already poured a lot of money into, is the parking lots in this complex. We spent $500,000 studying that. The board passed for Sitelogic to put about $500,000 worth of cost into developing that whole program. That's not in. That wasn't on Kelly's list. So that's another chunk of money that, assuming we continue to move forward with a program that we've already started, into the process of, that's another about $2.5–3 million cost that's looking, next year or so for that, to finish that whole project. So, I just didn't want to lose light of that one, because that's a big chunk of money that we've already spent money to get to there.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want to.
Yeah, so that would get you to 24.5 over 3 years if you added that back in.
And one of the things, going back to the housing, I think there's been something that was unexpected, which is people moving out of places like New York. That's really taken a strong uptick. So that's another reason why I think that the numbers might need to be adjusted.
But that's not leading to a huge housing boom. What I've seen is townhouses.
Yeah,
right?
but those have children too.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I'm not seeing a huge boom. And if you look over at Peace Valley Winery, they're big properties.
Yeah.
They're not tiny properties, right? They're big houses but big properties. So.
And you're talking about a 3-year window. It's not like we're talking about 10, 15 years. You know what I mean? 3 years we're really talking about 3 years. So it's not like we're going to have some major enrollment shift within the next 3 years.
No, I understand that, I just don't wanna deplete and then turn around and, just saying, there's lots of things to think about, that I would wanna think about.
I do think after the year that we've just had with 2020, though, it might be safest to just be extra conservative for at least the next year or two.
See what
And see how
happens.
the repercussions of this year are.
Because you could see people just selling their houses too if they're not making any money.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that haven't come back from, you know, having no work and.
Well, I think that's why the market is what it is, because a lot of people aren't going to be doing those projects because they can't right now. And,
And the
you know,
cost of
most
a
people
2x4.
aren't in a financial situation to be able to do it.
Yeah, the
So-
cost of a 2x4 went from $3 to $8.
Yeah,
A lot of
everything's
things
more
have gone
expensive.
actually up in price.
Yeah.
And the price of steel is crazy.
Everything is going up in construction.
I have to agree. I think being extra conservative is way safer than,
Yep.
because it's not like,
It's important.
with our capital projects fund, we don't have to spend so much money. Like, there isn't a percentage that we can have as much in there as we want. We can't keep between 8, we don't have to have between 8 and 10%.
Correct.
That's only for un-year tagged money.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's less stress for us to go.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you just get to the point where, what is the point in having it if you're just gonna load up an account and not actually do the projects that are on your list? But-
No, I mean, I'm not a fan of squirreling money to squirrel money. I mean, that, as a taxpayer, you know, I'm not a fan of people just holding on to money, but given what we've been through, I think we might just need to take a little time to really think about priorities. And again, for me, South would be the one that I would like to see something done for first.
What kind of price tag is that?
The South is 5
$5
million.
million.
Well, this says
Yeah.
4.1 with the
Yeah.
most.
Well, the
Yeah.
top is the audit, the
Would we-
250 seats, and then the 500 seats, so the total is over 5.
no, those are two different
No.
projects.
Right. I was just gonna ask that.
Yeah,
They're,
what
It's
was
either
sent
or.
today, what was
Either
sent today is
or.
two
Oh.
different projects.
Right.
I think I can
And then
call
if
up
they
on
want to
here.
build new.
Oh, okay, I was looking at this
Yeah.
spreadsheet that has it as 5.
Yeah, right. And so they're, South, we've talked about a couple different ways. That's why I understand why it's actually both in this attachment here. This is what was sent by Sitelogic, where this was attached with their scope of work in terms of what we would get for this money. But basically, this first one is a renovation of just basically the floor and the stage area. And so it makes it look like an auditorium, but doesn't do a substantial rebuild of the space. But it puts in seats, which the South does not currently have
Right.
in terms of looking like an auditorium, as well as doing some work on the stage with lighting and sound and curtain to make it feel more like a stage and a performing stage. It still is a relatively small stage, you know, for a middle school, but from that standpoint. This other one is then more of a redo, where they really are doing the upper part and the lower part, turning the balcony into usable space, expanding it, making sure the balcony accommodates more seats, as well as all the improvements down the base. So that would get you 500 people total. That's a significant number because they look at how many different grade levels can you get in all the students. If you're doing a show with 60 to 100 kids in it, how many parents per kid can be there? You know, when you think about concerts, because not everybody's coming to the concert, only the parents of the kids are coming with grandparents, and so can you get 4 seats per kid? You know, those types of things as you think about those types of events. So 500 is not an insignificant number. When you think about 100 people in a performing group is a good sized middle school performing group, and so that would give us 4 seats per kid from that standpoint. So that's their prices. The $5 million price tag that was put out there is related to this drawing, and this drawing was nothing more than a drawing. And so it's not like there was more site work done here, and the number really was an estimate back in 2013. So in 2013, it was estimated if adding on a music and auditorium wing to South, you know, making a few issues with the cafeteria, and there were some movement issues that were talked about, I remember being told about that piece. That was the $5 million price tag in 2013, which obviously, again, was an estimate in 2013 and is 5 years ago, 8 years ago. And so for us to think about what that cost would be now in construction, it probably would not be $5 million. But that was what was there in terms of why we really had 3 different ideas out there specific to South. Again, we have not had conversation with Sitelogic about what this would look like, right, the timing, right, all of that. So we would have to do all of that if it became a priority of the but that's where that came from. I hope that makes more sense. And then there was the site work project list that they had put out, the scope of work, that just gives you a sense for what the project is about. So, and that's there for your review.
Is this, Dr. Bolton, is that the 250 sheet or is that the 500 sheet?
I believe it is both.
Oh, okay.
When I was reading it, to me, it seemed like I don't know. I thought it was just the 200.
I thought it was the 250, the smaller version.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
that's
think
what
it is just the 250.
that's what I thought when I
but
read
it's not
it,
the work
that
for the, okay.
It doesn't,
It says provide
it's missing some
approximately.
things.
Again, I think Sitelogic was trying to help us out in terms of knowing that we were having a conversation, wanted to at least put some things out there to give you a sense and give you a size of the ball. Again, we would have to have drawings, we'd have to think about needs. We haven't talked to anybody in South in terms of what they think in terms of space and movement, and, because they're talking about a storage space in the library. Well, is that something that came from South, or is that something Sitelogic thought made sense? We just have to make sure those conversations, if this became a priority.
And how many seats do we have in the other two middle school auditoriums?
I'm gonna say 600 plus.
Okay, and do you know how the number of kids compares from building to building for the middle schools?
Yeah, North and Central are roughly the same size, and South is about 300 students fewer. So North and Central have about 900 kids, and South has about 600 kids.
So proportionally,
So,
this
think about it.
size would be suitable for this school because there's fewer students.
Yeah, I mean, right, in terms of, you're not gonna fit the whole school in, and once you're not fitting the whole school in, you're now talking about performances, right? You're not, because if you're gonna get everybody in, you're taking them to the gym anyway, because that's the only way you're gonna get all 600 or 650 or whatever you have, a couple of years from now, in terms of that piece, but, yeah.
So you wouldn't be able to fit all of the kids in this auditorium? But you
Most
can
likely
in
the
the-
500 now.
Oh, okay,
We
but
got
you
it.
can in the other two buildings, or?
It's interesting, I think we're close. I don't know the exact capacity of the two auditoriums. They're much larger.
Because I'd like to, I mean, and I don't know how much wiggle room we have, because I know we're dealing with a limited amount of space, and, I don't know how much more it is to make it a little bit bigger based on, where they're putting it and all of that, but, it would be nice to see them be able to sit all of the kids in the school if we're able to do that in the other two auditoriums. So even if it's,
We'll
proportional.
have to get that information, get that back to you. I don't know the answer to that tonight.
And then the,
What were you
just,
saying, Mr.
the
Bauer?
other piece would be,
I think are you giving me data?
Central has 604 kids, North has 610 kids, and South has 447
Oh,
kids.
so I was wrong. It's 600 and 450, not 900 and 600. So,
oh, good, so then
they
they
are,
would all
so
fit.
they could.
Oh, that would be
450,
great.
yep. 470 you said or something?
447
Yep,
is
yep.
South.
So,
Yeah, the other two schools are just over
600, okay. So yes, the 500 number would be significant.
Okay.
Because South is basically staying flat. Or if anything, it'll go down a little bit according to the projections, but not significantly like Central and North.
Okay.
So-
And then the only other thing I would say about the air conditioning is, when you talk about the DOAS, it's filtering the air and purifying the air, which helps when you're talking about kids getting sick and all the precautions that everyone is taking with all the different illnesses. And, it would be helpful to be able to do that. And we, and COVID money is going towards that. I know you said you can just offset the budget, but we are getting, several $1 million, I believe, in COVID money that can even be used for that purpose. So, there's a lot of different options there to be able to make that difference in the schools and improve the air quality and humidity issues that we have in the elementary schools. Because in some of the schools, and
Two different conversations specific to kitchens. One specific to air conditioning in the serving areas because of the heat that's generated where the primarily women are serving in terms of in the cafeteria, as well as reconstructing some serving lines. So I know you have a placeholder in. Some buildings, it's as simple as replacing equipment, which has been normal since I've been here, where you talk about putting in a walk-in freezer or something like that. But there are other buildings, like South, that might be a little more rebuilding. So I just want to make sure we say that out loud. They were other bigger ticket items that we've talked about at some point as we went through facilities.
Just out of curiosity, what is the $800,000 for Natatorium Improvements? Because I know they worked on that 2 years ago, they put a
At
new
least.
pump in the pool.
Well, there was,
Filter
the
system.
BB and the filter.
That was the filter system,
Yeah.
And ventilation.
I didn't know what else it
They're out,
needed.
yeah.
Can you give a sense for this summer in terms of,
Yeah, so this summer is a new filter system. They're draining the whole pool. The whole pool wasn't completely regrouted, so they're regrouting the whole underwater surface. There's tile work along the perimeter that needs to be repaired and replaced. Seating in the natatorium for the spectators, there's a lot of broken seating. In the locker rooms, it's another improperly pitched floor where the water doesn't drain to the drains. That's getting corrected. There's steel doors that are rusty that should have been stainless steel. Those kind of things are getting replaced because they're like, wow, I can't believe that's this condition in a place like that. So those are a lot of the big ticket things that are happening this summer.
How old is this?
Hmm?
The pool? Oh, the
This,
pool.
that space?
It's gotta be older than
It's older
that.
than that.
Yeah, because my kids went swimming.
I swam
But you
there.
also, Mr. Harper, if I remember, this involves the coping as well.
Right, that's the perimeter
Yeah.
tile.
So, and that's something that,
Pools are
you know, it's just,
expensive.
pools
Pools
are
are expensive.
expensive and they're tough, yeah.
And plus the diving platforms, the diving board, all those things are at the age where they don't look good and there's some problems with the concrete bases. So there's a lot of repairs that it's time for.
About 3 or 4 summers ago, the pool was drained down and tile, is it called grout? Is it grouting that goes, was regrouted and stuff? But apparently that's on every 3-4 year.
Right, it depends on water quality. There's a lot of variables that make grout kind of erode. But apparently when they did it last time, they didn't do the entire pool, so it wasn't completely done. They just did patching areas from what I heard. It was prior to me being here, but this is gonna do all the grout through everything that's underwater and some other associated things. There's every 3 years, the main inlets at the bottom of the pool have to be replaced by code, and unless you're sending a scuba diver down here, that's the time to do it when we're draining the pool, so. But there's a lot of substantial things happening in that area, but not replacing anything that was done during the last round, like the HVAC and some of those repairs. All those are still good.
Last summer was the boiler.
In the pool boiler. Because they couldn't use the pool last year for a while, right? Like, they would shut down, it was,
I think it was just a COVID thing.
Forgot about that.
I'm trying to forget.
Remember
I
everything was
believe you're-
closed down?
I believe you're remembering, Mrs. Dolan, that they were, while they were finishing the boiler install, was right where we were getting back and there was some usage of the pool. So there were some dates where they could underutilize the pool because they were
Okay.
finishing that project. So it did overlap as we were coming back
okay.
and finishing that project is what you remember, so.
What is the yearly cost to operate that pool?
Too much? I don't have it offhand.
How many yards of concrete facility?
It's connected to our main systems, that way it was separate, and just the chemistry of the water and all the required testing. I can try to get some of that data for you, but I don't know today.
Okay.
Mr. Dahlberg had brought up conversation regarding the paving at the high school area as well as transportation, right? There were 5 lots. Now, I think we had talked about lot 3, which is the one down kind of by the Blooming Glen entrance, was the smaller one. That from a number standpoint, perhaps we didn't need that one. I think we actually removed that at one point, but there were the 4 other lots. One is the one that was out here with the pole barn. 2 is the one up by the add-on, back by the pool area. And there were the 2 levels, because they had talked about being able to maintain that field. We decided we wanted both levels, although we didn't need both levels. You know, you could do it without. Lot 4 is the lot that is just basically restriping what I call the front lot of transportation. It's not a significant project, because we're moving everything from the front to the back.
Right.
And so we were turning the front into parking spaces. So you had to take the fence down and, do some restriping, but it wasn't a major. But then the back was a major. If you remember, in terms of adding that space, and they had some water issues, and they found a way around the water issues, and they talked about the snow scraper. I'm not sure if that's what you really call it, but that's what I call it, the huge snow scraper.
Get the snow off
For
the
the,
top of the
yeah, to get the
buses.
snow off the top of the bus and that area. And so that was lot 5. And so I just want to make sure that we as we're thinking about priorities, we're talking about everything that is there, to make sure, right?
Yep.
All right, any other questions, any other comments anyone wants to make? The good news is we have this summer done. We'll continue to work on a recommendation as we're moving out of this summer. We are going to wait for the final numbers for West Rock Hill as well as the tennis courts. Although we've talked timing with Sitelogic, and we're feeling good about that in terms of having those projects done in time to be able to use them in the fall.
West Rock Bill's out to bid now. They'll come in, the bids will come in the day of our April facility committee meeting.
Okay.
And then we'll go over them that night. Sitelogic will be here that night. And then at the May meeting is when the bids will come in for the tennis courts. And just to piggyback on what Dr. Bolton was saying, as we do make our final decisions on our parking lots for 2022, we continue to think about that. If we do this area out here, then we would need to relocate the salt shed. So that's another cost and over to Kelly's building. So there's moving pieces that, if this happens, then this is that happens too. So we just kind of have to, as Dr. Bolton says, keep our, keep rolling with these things so that I think the faster we make decisions for Sitelogic, we put them in a better position to be able to react to our desires and needs and wants.
And I just have one question I want to just circle back to Mr. Dahlberg. If I remember right, we're still between $1.5 million and $2 million behind on our revenue streams
This year, yes.
this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll have March numbers next week.
Okay.
But yes, that's where we're
Roughly, because you're off on the investment side.
Our investments is
$1.5 million,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So we're down on our revenue side.
Okay? Anything else other than a huge thank you to Mr.
No,
Harper?
no.
and
Mr.
Mr.
Harper.
Dahlberg?
Thank you.
All right, let me check to see if there's any additional
Bless.
public comment.
Okay.
See, actually, jeez. Oh, it hurts. It hurts.
What's the magnifier?
Yeah. I can't see it. I'm trying to open something for this, circle and
So it's probably just another video.
okay. So I can see it on the
There is
computer.
no public comment.
Okay, there is no additional public comment, so any other last questions or comments from board members?
Just one, if we were to move forward with air conditioning, where would that fall? And would that be like another, that wouldn't like really go in here, that would be like in addition to a summer capital project?
Yes, yeah.
But we couldn't do all of them in 1 year, right?
No, and they couldn't do the work.
It's unlikely that you get the equipment and do the work
In 1 year, so,
Right.
I know that we talked about that before, it would have to be like a handful that, like, split
Yeah,
it
we'd have
up.
to do three and then, we'd have to do 3 and then 4.
Right,
Yeah.
So it would take 2 years to do them all.
I just wanted to make sure, I didn't see this included in the big project, so this is like an additional.
It is, the old numbers are at the end of the, what I call the colorful chart.
Mhm.
When you get to the other projects, the air conditioning and the DOAS is in there, but the newer numbers were just received today. And so
Okay.
they were given as a separate. Okay?
All right, and with that, the next Facilities Committee meeting is scheduled for April 12th.